All right, welcome, Rabbi Shais. You need no introduction. Certainly not here on this discussion. So, about a year and a half ago, you and I had a discussion which I titled "The Lubavitcher Rebbe, a Treasure Trove of Personal Development." I think that's what I titled it. And it was one of the most listened to podcasts, continues to be one of the most listened to podcasts I put out.
I was surprised by that.
Me too.
Why were you surprised?
Because I thought it would be more niche. You know, there are different people who listen to me. Some Orthodox Jewish, I expected they would be interested. Some were in the recovery community or interested in self-help, personal development. And I didn't assume there would be dual audiences for that one. So I was surprised.
Same here. I did not think it would have such broad appeal.
But it did.
Yeah.
It did. And not only did it have numbers, because numbers aren't the whole story, right? We can put videos of cats laughing and we'll get more views than either of these. It's more about impact. And I heard a lot. I heard about it from a few people. And, you know, there are certain episodes that I share past the release date. Like I'll come in conversation. So I'll know those 5, 6, 7, that these are ones that I share with people even well after they're released. And this is one of them. There's probably 6 that are in that category. And this was one of them. For various reasons, I may share it. But it had appeal. It had interest to me. So I wanted to set a relatively ambitious goal for the discussion, if possible.
Okay, let's hear it.
So what we're talking about in this one, right, unlike some of our other conversations, is not theory, is not an idea, but it's more about actual study. And that's what we did in the Lubavitcher Rebbe podcast, where we actually went through, to some degree, I mean, it's not the proper format for an in-text dive, but we looked at a specific text that we both had looked at previously, and then we discussed the text itself.
By the way, I'm curious how many people out there would want a format of text-based study where how many people would like to hear Eli reading in Yiddish or in Hebrew and translating? At any rate, if you're interested in that format, let us know or let Eli know. That would blow me away if there were
something in the original.
If there were an audience for that.
Right. That wasn't my intent.
But we're not doing that tonight.
We're not doing that tonight. And there's also some of that out there, right? There's some of that out there. There's the gap that, so to speak, I'm looking to fill within myself, right? This has never really been about anybody else. Within myself is the practical.
Oh, in search of more, you're the guy who's searching?
That's correct.
Okay. Now I got it.
I am in search of more.
So this is stuff that you're searching for?
Correct.
Okay. Now I get the whole premise of the podcast.
That's the idea. And then I put on a video. Time. It helps me focus. And
okay.
There we go. So.
Got it. Okay, so what are we doing tonight?
Okay, so there's a text which we shared with each other on the biblical portion of Shmos, which is read from this recording next week, but in terms of the calendar itself, the week of, probably January 7th to January 13th, something like that. My date's correct?
I didn't look at the calendar.
Okay,
but whatever.
Like January 7th
it's
to
the
January
week
13th.
that this podcast is being released.
Correct. And
so it's, as the Alter Rebbe said, man darf leben mit der Zeit.
Right, which means...
And you could translate that for everybody.
There was a famous rabbi who said that, translated as we got to live with the times, but it's that the Torah has practical application for today. And that's the ambitious goal that we have, because...
Yeah. And specifically, not just the Torah in general, but the way that Jews do it is every week we do another Torah portion and we finish the entire 5 books of Moses in a yearly schedule. And the premise is that whatever that week's Torah reading is, it has specific relevance to that time. The Rebbe would often speak about that at the Verbrengens. He would connect current events to something that was in that week's Torah portion.
Correct.
So it's not just the Torah in general has relevancy. There's a specific relevancy to whatever that week's Torah portion is.
So then there'll be an even more ambitious goal, because we'll have to have one foot in the future over here that whatever we learn tonight has to apply in some way to what's going on next week. But the goal that I set at the beginning, the ambitious goal that I intended to state, was that there is a practical application for this learning. That's not something that I knew before. Meaning
What did you think before?
A reminder doesn't count. If we go through this and it's like, oh, it's a really good idea to pray every morning. I knew that before. We're not doing this for a practical application. Either the same thing or in a different way, or a new thing. Got to be something new that comes from this discussion.
So you need a
for
chiddush.
myself. Whether it's a new idea or the new implementation of an old idea or a new way of seeing something I've seen before, or a new way of seeing a new thing, there's got to be something. What is this about, right? If someone comes to a Tanya class and sits with you for 2 hours and says, Rabbi Shais, thank you so much. I learned the exact same thing in the exact same way last week.
Right.
You won't come home telling your wife how good you feel about that compliment.
Right.
Say, well, like, wow, I heard this before, but I never heard it in that way. Or it landed for me in a different way entirely. So that's the goal, but in a very practical way, because that's what I think. When I was in yeshiva, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I didn't like studying the Hasidic philosophy at all. It felt so distant to me. So I was one of those who, during the portions of the day where we were meant to be studying Hasidic philosophy, I was reading the Talmud and... Correct.
Really?
Yes. Not always. They didn't like it. It bothered them more than if I did nothing. But I was more interested in those topics than I was in the Hasidic philosophy. It just sounded so far out there. This level of God and that level of God and this level of world and that level of world. It was never brought down into the practical. So I'm sensitive to that. Today, as I sit here, it's more interesting and easier for me to learn this than it is about the Talmud, cows goring oxes and people stealing rubles and or whatever the monetary system in the Talmud is. Those are
Zuzim or something.
Right. Those feel more distant today for some reason. But be that as it may, there has been for a long time a distance between the written word, Hasidic philosophy, and the practical application of it. So over here, what we're going to try to do different is find something that it practically applies to. The difference in the Lubavitcher Rebbe podcast that we did is that I'd already identified 3 pieces, and I took something away from it, and I was discussing it with you. And bouncing some of those ideas, and we discussed them, meaning in those, when I read it, I had the practical application. When I learned it, I had the practical application. In this one, when I learned it, I don't have the practical application yet. So the discussion that we're about to have, I don't have the very practical, okay, so what do I do with this, 10 pages of information I digested? What changes for me? So that's the goal.
So that's we have our work cut out for us.
Is that a difficult thing? Is that too much? Should we hang up?
No, it's not too much at all. And I'll tell you something. Every time that we learn, that has to be the goal. It has to be the goal. There has to be some personal insight, some relevant takeaway. Even when we study the most sublime subjects about the most spiritual goings on in the higher realms or whatever it might be, there has to be something that is relevant and applicable and practical. So that's the way we ought to be learning every single time.
Awesome. Okay, so it's
now I want to make one disclaimer. You have to be patient because it's a process, because it's an act of discovery. Literally, you're uncovering the practical relevance. It's always there. It's there, but it's a process to find it. So if you're willing to engage in the process, I'm sure with Hashem's help, we'll find it.
Well, we're here. You have someone ready, willing, and hopefully able. So should we...
Yeah,
you want to introduce the topic, or should I introduce the topic?
Well, you picked a particular talk, and I won't give the whole background again, which we did on the previous podcast that you mentioned already, the Lubavitcher Rebbe podcast. And if people want to consult over there, I think we gave a little bit of a history about this genre of literature, of writing. But I'll give the 10-second version so everyone should understand. These are talks that the Rebbe delivered orally at public gatherings, which were then later edited and prepared for publication. And the main place where those edited talks are found is a collection called Likutei Sichos. And this particular talk that Eli chose is from volume 6, I believe. Was that?
I think so,
I
yes.
think it was. Of Likutei Sichos. Again, Parsha Shmos, this week's Parsha. And yeah, so that's where it is. And I believe the version you sent me was the Sichos in English version. And we want to just shout out to Sichos in English, who does an amazing job making the original texts of the Rebbe's Sichos accessible to so many.
Correct. And as it does for me, which is great. It has it in the Hebrew, has it in the English. I'll often go back and forth between the two, and then my final review will be in the original, because I'll have worked
and
through
this
all the
particular
translations.
Sikha is in Yiddish. The volumes of Likutei Sichos go back and forth as far as which language they're in, Hebrew or Yiddish. This particular one is in Yiddish.
Correct. So you had mentioned Parsha Shmos, which is the first chapter in Exodus, and it talks about some of the Jews' visit to Egypt and the time there.
Yeah.
So do you want to introduce the concept, or should I?
Well, I'll in the spirit of how you laid things out, I will present a challenge, or
Okay.
I will articulate the challenge more explicitly. We have a sikha about how the Jews built cities in Egypt, and specifically what materials they used in order to make those cities. They were engaged in making bricks and building cities out of those bricks. And the challenge is going to be to figure out what brick making and city building out of bricks 3,300 so many years ago has to do with our lives today.
Correct. The premise from the outset, he lays out that Pharaoh's obsession was for the Jews to do brick making specifically, not just building with bricks and not just building with stones or any available object, or bricks were the most available. There was something about the brick making process.
Right.
And then
And when he
building
wanted
with
to
bricks.
torture them because they had the temerity to, or Moses had the temerity to ask, let my people go. So the punishment was to deprive them of the materials that they were provided to make the bricks, and to require them to still meet the quota.
Correct.
So it wasn't just about using bricks to make the cities, which ostensibly was the goal of Pharaoh. You have slaves for a reason, right? To produce labor, so, and to make things. So they were trying to make cities out of bricks. But there was something psychological about it, where it was not just he wanted the fruits of their labor. It was the brick making was part of the abuse, really. Like when he wanted to punish the Jews, he deprived them of the straw that they would use for the brick making process. So there's something about the bricks. It wasn't just practical. There's something more to it.
Yes, there was something almost spiritually significant. Maybe spiritual is not the right word, but there was something significant, maybe psychologically significant, or maybe
I would say
said
both.
differently,
I'd say both.
significant to
Practical,
the aspect of slavery.
psychological, spiritual, and perhaps other aspects as well. The bricks were significant on many levels.
Right. It was significant to the aspect of slavery to the Jewish people.
And furthermore, let's go to the verse that says that the Egyptians embittered, and everyone knows this from Maxwell House. This is a verse in Exodus, but it's a famous, any good American Jew knows the Passover Seder from the Maxwell House Haggadah. So this verse is actually brought in the Haggadah, that they embittered our lives with chaymer levanim, with mortar and bricks. So it's not just that we were slaves with mortar and bricks, but there's something bitter about it. There's something about it that added insult to injury. You could be a slave and doing all types of slave labor, but there's something specifically egregious about making bricks and then building stuff out of those bricks.
And specific to the Jewish people.
Yes.
Meaning something, if I understood correctly, there's something about the Jewish people's mission in this world that when they're forced to engage in brick making for building the brick making and then using those bricks to build Pharaoh's cities, the cities for Pharaoh, that this is adding insult to injury, not for any people,
Yeah.
specifically to the Jews with their mission,
Yes.
with our mission.
Yes. Yes. There's something. It pushes it touches a deep nerve. The symbolism of brick making is something deeply hurtful, and not just on a symbolic level. Although that too, but there's something about, and maybe I'm giving away too much here, what brick making ought to be, and what happens when you misappropriate that and mischannel that.
Oh, this
And
is
it's
like the original cultural misappropriation.
Maybe, yeah. Except maybe it's even worse because it's one culture forcing another culture to misappropriate its own culture.
Right, to misappropriate its own culture to build its culture.
Meaning there's something inherently Jewish about making bricks, and making bricks for Pharaoh is incredibly demeaning.
Right, meaning there's a mission-driven objective in making bricks. Let's say it clearly, making bricks for God, for the house of God, and Pharaoh imposing on them
Co-opting that, commandeering that.
and appropriating that and saying, okay, we're going to take your culture of making bricks and we're going to use that instead of building God's house to build my house.
Right. Now, I think we have to clarify, were the Jews brick makers before they were in Egypt?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, I don't think so. So we don't literally mean brick making. Brick making is a metaphor.
So good. So at this
So
point,
we have to talk about what brick making symbolizes.
Right. Let's do that.
Yeah. Maybe let's start by talking about the difference between two kinds of building materials, which we've had since ancient times, namely bricks and stones. The cities that we built for Pharaoh were not built out of stones. They were built out of bricks, specifically. Built out of bricks.
Right. Bricks being something that is man-made and stone something that you find in nature.
Very good. So the Rebbe distinguishes really what is the difference between bricks and stones is something that is man-made and something that occurs in nature.
Well, I looked this up because I was curious. So I don't think we make bricks today the way we made bricks in Egypt. There was a process then using the mud and the straw or dried grass and putting that out into the Egyptian heat. And that process, mud plus straw.
They may have
Egyptian
even
heat,
been fired in a kiln. I think the Sikha implies that it was actually fired in a kiln.
Actually, now that you say that, you're correct. It does say that in the Sikha. When I looked up on Egyptian brick making, it mentioned in the heat, but you're correct. In the Sikha itself, it says that there was fire.
Because later on, that fire also has metaphorical significance.
That's correct.
But I don't know how bricks are made today. I'm assuming it's a similar thing. You take some type of, I don't know, I don't think it's mud, but you take some type of material and you cook it, you bake it.
So I looked it up. It's there's something. It's like 2 or 3 feet beneath the earth. There's some. I think it's called shale. They take that, they run it through mills, process it, turn it into a powder, and then once it's in powder form, then they essentially bake it.
They fire it up, right? Okay, so I mean it's the basically same principle. Yeah, and it's interesting. And the Rebbe points this out in the Sikha, that there's a famous building project that's even more ancient than Egypt. And it involved bricks.
Is it the Tower of Babel?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and in fact, the Tower of Babel was made out of bricks because, and the Torah tells us this, there are no stones in Shinar. Shinar is one of the biblical names for the Fertile Crescent, for Mesopotamia, which is the location of Babylonia. So they have no stones because it's a valley. You have stones in coastal areas, in a valley, like in a plain. Like I'm from Chicago, I'm from the Midwest. You don't have big stones. You have soil.
Got it.
So I guess Babylonia was sort of like Illinois. So they had to make bricks.
Are you saying they're both devoid of God? No. Okay.
They're places for potential.
Right.
Potential for, that's how we choose to look at it. Yeah.
Okay, so we have so brick making itself, you were explaining what brick making is from a Jewish perspective prior to Egypt.
There's something unnatural, and I'm using the word unnatural decidedly with the connotations that it brings. There's something unnatural about bricks. Today when you use the word unnatural, it has a sort of the word is meant to arouse suspicion. Like advertisers don't put unnatural on their packaging. They put natural. No one puts unnatural, right? There's something unnatural. Now, unnatural is not inherently a bad thing. It just means man-made. A lot of things are man-made. But there is something unnatural about bricks. And so the Tower of Babel is an example of that. It's like sort of like the hubris of human ambition, which was exactly what the Tower of Babel was. We're going to build a tower to God and fight him, right? So brick making is sort of a suspicious activity right off the bat. And the Rebbe even suggests maybe that's what was so egregious about forcing Jews to be involved in it. And as is often the style of the Rebbe's sichos, there's this dialectic, point, counterpoint, proof, refutation, counterproof, counter-refutation. So it's first suggested that maybe what's so egregious about being involved in making bricks is that it's being involved in something that's unnatural. Working with stones represents working with the good nature that God himself created. And working with bricks implies something synthetic, something, maybe even something removed from God's plan or from God's order.
Right.
And the Rebbe says maybe that's why it was so terrible. But as we already sort of revealed, no, that's not why it's terrible. Actually, it's terrible not because brick making is such an awful thing to be involved in, but because brick making is supposed to be such a beautiful thing to be involved in, and then to misappropriate it is that much more egregious. So we already sort of gave away that
which is
that
okay.
twist. Yeah. So what is
this brick making? What is it that's so?
Okay. So we sort of put it out there in the Sikha that maybe brick making is a perversion of nature. Maybe we shouldn't be involved in messing with the natural order. We were so busy figuring out if we could. We never asked if we should. What's the line?
That should be the line.
No, but it's a famous line. It's Jurassic Park. I forget.
I'm not sure.
Google it. Yeah, it's
the
scientists were so busy trying to figure out if they could, they never stopped and asked if they should. Yeah, the human hubris. Could we create this dinosaur? Well,
should we?
Maybe you can, but who says you should?
Right, there's a lot of that going on. A lot of especially around genetics, right? There are a lot of those.
Yeah. So at first we're like, okay, maybe that's what's wrong with it. And then we say, no, actually, human creativity is good. Being involved in the world is good. Perfecting the raw materials that God provided us is good. That's what we were put here for. We were put here to make the world better than we found it.
This would suggest that there's a school of thought that we shouldn't.
Of course.
Would that be similar to the Hasidic school of thought as opposed to the Chabad Hasidic school of thought?
Everything can be framed and reframed in various different iterations. So you might say, perhaps, that the Rebbe's approach of making use of all of the technology in the world, let's say, versus other schools of thought which are more insular and shun the outside world more, that might be a similar paradigm. And it may be on a subtle level. It may be. It might be easier for us to give an example, which is a more broad example,
okay,
where the differences are even more obvious. So, you might have, for instance, Ellie, did you ever read the Unabomber Manifesto?
I have not, no.
I recommend it.
Really?
Ted Kaczynski, who's also from Chicago, like I am, they messed him up. He was actually this boy genius. He went to Harvard when he was like 15, and he ended up becoming a subject of the MK Ultra experiment. I sound like a conspiracy theorist right now, but it's actually something the CIA admitted to. There was a mind control experiment that you can Google this. It's one of those things that if the government hadn't admitted to it yet, you'd think anyone who believes in it is crazy. But there was an MK Ultra. Ted Kaczynski was actually a subject of the MK Ultra experiment. I don't think he was so mentally stable before. It definitely didn't help him. Anyways, he became the Unabomber, and he wrote a manifesto, which was published, I think it was in the New York Times. What's remarkable about it is I remember this as a kid and just thinking, this guy's a wacko. They caught him living in some shed in the middle of nowhere, living out in the woods. And I remember he was mad at modern society. He wanted to just get rid of modern society, and he was trying to blow up anyone who he thought was an important cog in that wheel of modern technological progress. That's all I really understood. In my adulthood, I read his manifesto. Unfortunately, I want to report to you that 95% of it is rather coherent. And in fact, yes, to my horror.
He had some good ideas. It was the way to go about it, maybe. That
I wanted him to be a blathering idiot because that's how I imagined him. But and obviously, the way he handled things was wrong. It is wrong to send people bombs. But if you read the Unabomber Manifesto, he was basically just a Luddite. He was anti-technology. He felt that people were becoming removed from nature. He said it was subverting human nature and the family structure and society, and we were getting farther away from
the way things were meant to be.
The way things were meant to be, exactly. And therefore, he was extremely anti-technology. I shudder to think how angry he would be if he had been a free man during the advent of the internet. This was all pre-internet, right? So
he was going off on light bulbs and televisions.
Yeah, he was. Exactly, he was.
Right, imagine what he'd say now.
Yeah. So there is this this attitude of viewing progress, and specifically human progress, as an abomination.
Human progress as an abomination.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was a true conservative, and he identified himself as such, and he identified liberalism as the main enemy. He was a true conservative in the sense of he wanted to go back. He wanted to preserve everything that was traditional, and the older, the better, and he shunned intrinsically anything that was new. And that's why I say if you would cut and paste his
there are some
manifesto,
who would use progressive as a derogatory term.
Someone who would use progressive as a derogatory term. I believe he does use, in the Unabomber Manifesto, he does use the term progressive as a dirty word. And if you would Can I say this? I know I'm going to get blowback for this, but you know what? What
Not
the
from
heck? Not from you. I bet you that I could cut and paste entire paragraphs from the Unabomber Manifesto and transcripts from Rush Limbaugh, and people will not be able to tell the difference 9 times out of 10.
I hear you.
Yeah. At any rate, I'm not saying Rush ever blew anyone up, but
Right.
I'm saying it's the same type of rhetoric. At any rate, there is such a worldview
Someone's
that
going to think
shuns
you're a
human
progressive.
progress.
You are. I said someone's going to think you're a progressive.
Well, I am a progressive because I want society to progress
Right.
to Mashiach.
Right. No, the truth of the matter is, and just a little bit of a tangent on politics, is that it seems that right now many Orthodox Jews are subscribing to this idea that conservatism is going to save us in some way, and there's a liberalism that's going to create issues. But believing in that is idol worship.
Yeah, I think those are paradigms that do not neatly fit within the Jewish worldview. And I think as Jews, we have to study Torah and get our heads on straight. And then wherever any isms happen to align with our beliefs, then we should support those isms. Not become followers of those isms,
Right.
God forbid, but to support them because they're in that particular issue, they're getting it right.
Right, or even within the aspects of the ism that is supporting, but
Right, to support where an ism is aligned with Torah.
right. I don't want to
not
go off on the tangent, but I guess it goes both ways, and it's like how some Jews, I think, ended up with the liberal camp, saying, "Okay, that's that's what would have saved us from Nazism," and just going on that camp way past
look,
where it started.
I can tell you, I mean, because in the minds of my grandparents, FDR is the one who stopped the Holocaust. I mean, although they would also complain why he didn't bomb the tracks but at any rate, and maybe it was the social programs that he started and the New Deal, but I can tell you that growing up, Jews, since FDR, that's it. Like Jews are Democrats. And then, you see it's funny, like we're getting way off on a tangent. But
Way off. I just thought I should say this.
But, okay, fine. I'm going to rein myself in here. But the point is, any time that we align ourselves with any of these ideologies and we think that they've got it right, we're compromising the greatest gift that God gave to the Jewish people, which is the ability to rise above the craziness of this world and to identify the truth. So we should be getting our ideology from Likutei Sichos, as we're doing right now, and then when pundits and politicians happen to get it right and be aligned with what we know to be true from the Torah, then we can support them.
Understood. Clear. So bring
Okay.
it back to the discussion.
So there is such an approach to life that says that human progress is inherently an abomination, or at the very least to be regarded with suspicion.
Right. So what you're saying is at that point in time in ancient Egypt, brick making was as, not necessarily not novel, but was as there was as much skepticism. There was skepticism in the same way someone today would have towards non-organic food.
And I don't know if I can say that because I'm not an anthropologist and I'm not sure that's how people actually viewed it. But I'm saying like this: the Rebbe is encouraging us to understand that brick making is a technology. Literally.
Okay.
I mean, we think technology means
Electronics.
electronics, right? Which is
Right. But
high
wheel
tech.
is a wheel is a technology.
A wheel is technology. Right? A wheelbarrow is technology. Right. Very good. Okay. A lever is technology. Okay. So bricks are technology. So I don't know how they regarded it in ancient Egypt. I'm not sure that's even important. The point is, there's a worldview that regards technology with suspicion, at least with healthy suspicion. Like, why are you doing anything new? Or like you said, what do you call it? You say like non-organic food?
Non-organic, yeah.
Yeah, or like genetically modified food.
Right.
Right? So if I tell you that your food is genetically modified, you're like, oh, really? Well, the truth is all of it is. So like you're not going to avoid it. But if you tell that to someone, they hesitate. Okay, so you tell somebody, the building material here was modified through human intervention. Well, sounds kind of weird, right? So that's the idea. The idea is maybe what was so egregious about our particular form of labor in Egypt was that Pharaoh forced us to be involved in technologically modifying nature. And we say, I'm saving us a lot of the back and forth, but we say, no, that actually isn't a problem. That's not what's so bad about it. You know what's bad about it? And we revealed this already at the beginning. What's so bad about it is there's something
uniquely Jewish.
Sacred. Say again?
Uniquely Jewish is what I said.
Yeah. Okay. You're saying uniquely Jewish. I'm saying sacred. I think maybe even we're saying the same thing. There's something uniquely Jewish and sacred and special about using human power to modify nature. And that's why it's so painful when an evil entity like Pharaoh misappropriates that.
And misappropriating it, Pharaoh being the symbol of evil.
Pharaoh being the symbol of evil, and particularly the symbol of evil because of his being absolutely self-absorbed. Pharaoh is the one who's described as saying, I made the river and everything in it. Or I made the river and I made myself. He's a self-made man who worships his own maker. So Pharaoh is evil at its actual core, which is absolute self-absorption to the extent where anything I desire is justified, which is the source of all evil. And ultimately, Pharaoh is not a figure from history. Pharaoh is a persona within each and every one of us.
Right.
That wants to put itself and its desires ahead of everything else.
So you're saying Pharaoh is not the individual. Pharaoh represents something inside of us here today, right? A viewpoint or perspective or a pull inside of us.
Yeah.
And Egypt represents not just ancient Egypt, but any period of time that's exile.
Okay. So, yes, Pharaoh is self-will run riot. Being in Egypt means being under Pharaoh's domain, where that ego is running our lives. And therefore, consequently, our greatest human capacities, or let's even lean into it, our Jewish capacity to be innovators and to introduce something new, something creative,
technological advances,
in the furtherance societal
of
progress, that capacity, instead of being used how it's supposed to be used, and we could talk about in a minute how it's supposed to be used, is being used to feed my self-obsession.
So instead of it being used towards good, it's being used towards evil.
Right, which specifically means to feed my self-obsession, that I'm becoming a genius and innovating how to create more and more technology and tools to serve myself.
Understood. Okay, so I think now we understand why.
You know, when we talk about addiction, they say where there's an addict, there's a way.
Where there's a
Where there's an addict, there's a way.
Yes.
Right? Where there's a will, there's a way. Where there's an addict, there's a way.
Yes.
So if an addict wants something, there's no one more inventive or more ingenious than an addict who wants to get what they want to get.
100%.
And they're going to figure out a way, even if they have to create some new technology. Right?
Yeah.
So what's so egregious about that is not just that you are exacerbating your addiction by becoming a genius at it. What's so egregious about it is that genius is something that was given to you to be used for another purpose. It has a purpose already. And now, instead of being used for that purpose, which we still haven't spoken about, it's being used for this self-destructive purpose.
Okay, but now what we would understand based on what we've already discussed is, without explaining what that purpose is why this was so tedious, why this was described as embittering one's life.
Right.
This process of using their unique gifts towards using their unique gifts, their genius, towards bad instead of good.
Yeah. I mean, there's a movie about a Holocaust survivor who was a concert violinist, and part of his experience was that they, instead of killing him, they made him play violin for the Nazis in the camp. So you could say, well, it saved his life. Yeah, but can you imagine anything more humiliating and embittering than being forced to take a precious God-given talent and use it at the bidding of your tormentors?
Perfect analogy.
So you're a brick maker. We're brick makers. We're innovators. We were sent to this world to figure out how to make the world a better place, and not just by shifting things around and rearranging what's already there, but coming up with new stuff if need be.
Right, brick makers being a concept. All these are concepts. The concept of innovating, creating, advancing everything around us.
Right.
To move things forward in a positive way. And
that's right.
And saying, play violin for the Nazis.
That's right. And there's nothing more embittering than that.
This makes sense. You made it make sense. So I understand the negative. You explained that. The self-will.
The misappropriation.
Right. Why it was so painful and the negative it was used for. What is the positive?
So I just want to make sure everyone puts this all together, because we're using a lot of mixed metaphors here. But having to use my creativity and my ingenuity to figure out how to feed my ego, how to feed my addiction, is playing violin for the Nazis. Because that capacity that I have to change things and to, I'm going to use the word that has negative connotations, but it doesn't have to, manipulate things. It means to move things around, to rearrange things, and to make them work in a way they haven't worked before. That's a beautiful, that's a precious and beautiful talent that we were given. And to use that to figure out how to get my way and to try to extract some type of satisfaction out of life is demeaning, it's degrading, and it's the deepest form of slavery.
Right, and we don't have
to make that clear.
Right, and we don't have to go far to imagine examples of people using their skills. You and I have both spoke about addiction a lot. We wouldn't have to go far to imagine examples of people using their skills to further their addiction. Right? Someone who has incredible charisma, for example, and can use that to influence a room full of people, and instead uses it to manipulate people to into relationships with them, as an example.
Sure, exactly. And what's egregious about it is that not only is he doing something bad, he's using a precious gift
that has such potential.
Yes, has so much potential, and he's using that thing in order to do something bad. Again, it's playing violin for the Nazis.
Understood.
By the way, maybe it was a pianist. I don't know. I didn't actually see the movie.
Yes.
What?
The idea is there. The concept is there. The analogy
whether it was
is
a
perfect.
piano or it was a violin, I'm sure somebody's going to write it. It wasn't the violin. It was a piano. Okay, whatever it was. Okay.
Okay, so now that we have that background, what is the good? And we can just leave it as that it's good.
Yeah.
We all know the difference between, not all of us know, but there's a sense of the difference
Okay, yeah,
between
but
good and evil.
yeah, you're right. We all know the difference between good and bad. So, I mean, we could just leave it at that and say, use your ingenuity for good stuff. But I think it deserves a little bit more elaboration. And I think the way to elaborate is I'll throw a question at you, which is, what place does progress and ingenuity have in the service of God?
There are kind of two things that come to mind. One would be, if we're in trouble, to get us out of it. Like, meaning if we've gotten ourselves into trouble, is to get us out of it. Like problem solving, so to speak.
Okay.
And a second feels more like creation, like just a draw towards the positive. So, for example, does that distinction make sense? Did I clarify it enough?
Yes, Rabbi Shais Taub.
Right. One is
away from
problem
evil
solving,
and do
and one
good.
is creating positivity.
Shlila and Chiyuv. One is negation. One
Is that where you're hoping I would go, or you were trying to?
I have something in mind, but let's see where you go. I mean, I'll push back and I'll say the first one, meaning problem solving, it's a practical necessity because problems come up, you have to solve them. But I'm asking more in the philosophical sense, what inherent value is there to ingenuity and innovation within our Judaism? Or is there? Okay.
Well,
or is
create,
there?
we can create something. We can create something that's never been created. I mean, even if we think about this conversation that's happened.
But isn't religion inherently all about just doing what's always been done?
Not if we're going to get to the place we want to go.
Not if we're going to get to the place we want to go.
And there are many examples of this.
If there's a goal, then there's going to need to be progress. And if there's going to need to be progress, there's going to need to be innovation.
Right. Meaning we're not maintaining the job. I don't think either of us would have signed up for this. Not that we had a choice, but would have signed up for this job of human existence for maintaining.
There is a view within Judaism that our mandate is to maintain, to be true conservatives, to conserve what we were given.
Right. At this point, so conserve what we were given, and now that it was destroyed, or some aspects of it were destroyed, so now we have to do some problem solving as a result of what was...
Right. To, like Civil War weekend LARPers dressing up. So the Yiddishkeit was destroyed 2,000 years ago when the Romans burnt down the temple, and we're trying to reenact that.
But who is the view? Where's the view from that it's meant to be preserved? Because at what point in time are we preserving from? If we go back to the beginning of the story.
Right. At what point are you preserving? Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. Like, how far back are you preserving?
Like Adam before he ate the apple?
You want to cut out? No, it's a great question because it's like, well, when the Mishnah was written down, that was very radical. You weren't supposed to write down the oral tradition.
Right.
And Rebbe, 2,000 years ago, wrote it down. So if you want to be a true conservative, let's go back to pre-Mishnaic times.
Right, where nothing is recorded.
Right, exactly.
That would probably include this conversation. It could be had, but it can't be recorded.
So you said something good. If we want to make progress, if there's a goal, and then therefore we want to make progress, so then we need innovation. So here's what I'm going to say to you. I'm going to reframe the question. what you know about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, would you characterize the Lubavitcher Rebbe as an innovator?
Certainly, yes.
Do you, to your knowledge, do you know if the Lubavitcher Rebbe was, if he got any flack for some of his innovations?
Yeah, absolutely. Just for
Right.
example, I mean, one that I knew of growing up was introducing Judaism in a, I don't know, maybe a drip drop format. Like, hey, take this. This is good. You don't have to absorb all of it at once, but you want to pray today? You're welcome, just like the person who's been praying every single day and every aspect of his day was perfectly Jewish. You're welcome. You're part of the 10. You have a space with us.
And the
One of one.
opposition to that would be, hey,
You're going to dilute the whole thing.
let's just preserve what we've got, keep it authentic, and when someone's ready for the whole thing, that whole thing will be preserved and waiting for them because we've preserved it.
Right. That's massive innovation. Or even I would say, your opinion, the Rebbe would be on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of these things.
The Rebbe is on all of these.
Right, he is, but I'm saying that would have been his specific instruction. I want my talks filmed and recorded and chopped up in much the same way.
The Rebbe wanted his talks on satellite because
Exactly.
satellite was the technology that existed.
And that's not an opinion that everyone held. They said, stay off the TV. The
Not
TV
at all.
is the TV is for the dark side.
That's right. So, or you can use the example of even something that's not high tech, like Chabad houses. The idea of a Chabad house, that when that started in California, there was pushback against that. Like, you want to make a shul where people come daven, fine. What's a Chabad house? Like a bunch of hippies hanging out. You're going to call it Jewish? Or the mitzvah tanks. You take an RV and some yeshiva boys go on the RV and they ride into Manhattan and they jump out and put tefillin on people. Like, what kind of craziness is this?
So I view him as an innovator. You do as well. What you're saying is that his innovation is not just saying there were problems that existed that were created in the last number of thousand years, and I'm putting forth innovation to solve these problems. Now,
I'm not right. I'm
even
not
without any
saying
of
that
those, even without those, in order to move things forward from the virgin state of the world, it needs innovation. You're saying that type of innovation.
Right. Just to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying. You were saying to me that I'm not saying that it's merely troubleshooting.
Correct.
In other words, there is inherent value in having mitzvah tanks. And that is an improvement over whatever Adam and Eve had in the garden before the sin.
Right. Let's say it this way. If I build a building, then the first building, they probably didn't think of fire escapes or fire engines with ladders. They just thought of a building, so they built a building. And then at one point in time, they realized, hey, there are fires that are too difficult for us to get to. So either let's build fire escapes or ladders on fire engines in order to put out those fires. In other words, without the innovation of large buildings, there would be no need for fire engines with ladders or fire escapes. So that's not...
I'm saying more than that. I'm saying had tall buildings not been invented, someone would have to invent them just so that some guy could invent these technologies. What I'm saying is that the innovations are not merely reactive to a condition.
Exactly. That's what I'm
there's
saying.
Inherent
Okay, so we're saying
value
the same
in these
thing.
innovations.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. From the world's virgin state, these innovations would benefit the world. And it's not because someone tinkered that now we have to.
If you guys would have left everything alone, we never would have had to come up with this.
Exactly.
Right. It's not that. It's not that. It's that God made a world and he left it imperfect. And he invited us to partner with him as co-creators by perfecting the world through our innovation, ingenuity, and creativity.
And by inviting us as co-creators, he gave us general skills, talent, and resources, and specific skills, talents, and resources in order to make that
each
happen.
individual has different...
Collectively, we have skills, and
Yeah.
right, and individually, we have skills in order to move that forward. And comes
Yes.
along Pharaoh, the symbol of Pharaoh, the ego, and says,
Yeah.
I'm going to co-opt that for my use.
That's right. And that's tragic. That is the literal definition of tragedy. How the mighty have fallen. Something so noble and beautiful is falling so low. It's tragic.
It is indeed. So where do we go from here?
So first of all, we have to realize that enslavement in Egypt and the liberation from Egypt is something that we experience on an ongoing basis.
So is there an example of the brick making that's going on now?
In the negative or in the positive?
In the negative, I meant. Meaning the Pharaoh imposing a burden on us of brick making.
I mean, you mentioned tools of social media. If somebody is using social media to feed their ego, to get likes for the dopamine hit, or for a distraction from their life, it's not just pathetic, it's tragic. It's not just pathetic, it's tragic. See, pathos doesn't imply that something beautiful has been corrupted. Tragedy is when something noble becomes degraded. So it's not just pathetic that somebody is trying to get internet likes to feed some emptiness inside. It's tragic because the ingenuity that you're putting forth in creating those posts is ingenuity that you are given by God to figure out how to make the world a holier place. The reason you know how to get those likes is because really God gave you the ability to innovate and make the world a holier place. And instead of using that talent to make the world a holier place, you're using it to feed Pharaoh.
By the way, I'll tell you a story. So today I was filming before this. What I've started doing is blocking out once every couple of weeks. And that day is for podcasts and discussions such as these. So earlier today I was interviewing a woman. Her name is Faith Neese. She's a local therapist, Boca Raton. And as she was sharing her personal story, she said that she attempted suicide when she was 13. And when she said the word suicide, the videographer jumped up and said, "Don't use the word suicide. It's bad for the YouTube algorithm." And someone else jumped up and said, "In fact, it is. Maybe we should go back." And it took me a second to remind myself that I'm not doing this for the YouTube algorithm.
Wow. Wow.
So that's what you're talking about.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. And that's a moment of Yitzias Mitzrayim. That here you are, you have this talent, okay? You are a thoughtful person who likes to engage in discussions, but also you have sort of a marketing mind, which you've used in your business success, and you sort of put those together and you created this forum, and ostensibly the point of it is to make the world a better place.
Right.
However, there's always that tug of war where the ego starts to get involved, and sometimes it happens slowly, sometimes it happens quickly, but the ego can come, Pharaoh can come and co-opt this and say, oh, here's what we're doing. I know what we're doing. We are becoming internet famous.
I'm laughing because I'm realizing that I just screwed up 2 YouTube algorithms with the same word. Edit it out. It was unnecessary for this one.
You know what? And here's the thing. We believe in God, and we believe that whoever needs to hear this podcast, God is bigger than YouTube and its algorithm. And God will create pathways for whoever needs to hear this podcast to hear this podcast.
Indeed. But it's a perfect example of the way these and it sounds so noble, right? Because the message is good and I want it to get out.
Of course. That's right. That's on a very subtle. Congratulations, Eli. Now you understand. These are the moral dilemmas of the shliach.
I'm listening.
Oh, this is it. It's like, no, it's not about self-aggrandizement. I'm on a holy mission. It's about accomplishing the mission.
Right.
You have to be very, very careful.
Right. That's when the ego is tricky.
The ego's so tricky, and it's gonna put its foot in the door by coming to you with something that you can't. It's going to put its foot in the door. It's going to say, hold on a second. I have one more thing to say. And you say, get out of here. You've been ruining my life. I don't want to hear anything more from you. No, but I want to tell you something. Let's make the world a better place. Oh, okay, fine. Okay. All right, fine. You have me. How are we going to make the world a better place? Well, since you asked. Right?
Right.
And that's why it's so important. I was saying before, to learn Torah is so important so that we don't get swept along with different ideologies. It's so important to remember what the goal really is. And these things are just tools. In other words, don't worship the brick, use the brick. Don't turn the brick into your goal. Don't turn your brick into your God. Use the brick to serve God. You know, in the Sikha, he gives an example of the potential for bricks to be corrupted. And he actually mentions a Mishnah that says, that describes an idol worshiper propping up a brick and bowing to it, using the brick as some type of an idol.
Right.
Yeah. Remember that?
I do. I'm understanding the reference now, but I remember it, yes.
So do you worship the brick or do you use the brick as a tool to worship?
That is the question. So how do we stay...
Yeah.
So how do we stay mindful of that? Because like you said, it's so easy to go sideways.
We have to remember what the goal is.
It's continuing eye on the prize, eye on the prize. What is this really about?
Right. And eye on the prize means that God wants a perfect world that is perfect not because of his perfection, but because of the perfection that comes from our imperfection.
Say more.
God could have imposed perfection on the world.
Correct. He has worlds that existed.
That's not what he wanted. Ultimately, infinity cannot just be infinity that only emerges from infinity, because then it's not truly infinite. True infinity has to be a paradox. It has to be infinity which also emerges from the finite. So if God were to have imposed perfection on creation, that would not be completely perfect. But when you have the combination of God's perfection and human imperfection, which partners with God to bring about a perfect world, that is true, complete perfection.
Understood. So have we explained what good is? What the good is that we're working on, what the mission is? Is this it?
Perfect world.
The perfect world.
A perfect world means, I'll put it in very simple terms, but this is how our prophets describe it. This is also how Maimonides describes it as a matter of law. In simple terms, non-spiritual terms, down-to-earth terms, we're describing a world where there is peace and prosperity and safety for everyone. That is our goal.
Peace, prosperity, and safety for everyone.
Yes. Now, if you want to add to that, you can say, and there is enlightenment or God consciousness for the entire universe. But that's not really adding to
So
it,
how do
'cause
we
it's
get
not-
there? Because there are political parties that are promising this now all over the world.
Yeah. So you're saying, how is our utopia different from others?
Exactly. Yeah. How do we, meaning if you say that is the destination and that is the goal, how do we stay true to that and not get confused by someone using the same words as that?
Right.
Meaning there's something else missing in the equation, because it's very easy to get swept up. Someone is saying the same words. Follow me. I will bring us to peace, prosperity, safety, enlightenment for all.
Right. Sounds good. Yeah, that's what
amazing.
we want. Okay, let's sign
That's
up.
our guy. Let's vote for him.
Right. That's our guy. Right. Exactly. So you're really pushing here. I try to be subtle about these things, because for the same reason you don't mention certain words on YouTube. And maybe this is my own internal Pharaoh. I gave a class last night on anxiety, or maybe it was Monday night. Doesn't matter. I gave a class recently here locally in the 5 towns on anxiety. And I said that the story you tell yourself about why you're stressed is a personal mythology. Literally a mythology. You're not stressed because of your story. You're stressed for other reasons, and then you create a mythology to explain the phenomenon of why you're stressed. And then that story becomes your bedtime story. And literally you go to bed with that story every night. But that's not really why you're stressed.
Right.
So I said that. And I saw it in a letter from the Rebbe. And I said it. You know what I didn't say? Because I didn't have the guts.
Go ahead.
The Rebbe goes further than that and says that the real underlying cause for your stress is if you are a Jew and you're not living your life in alignment with God's will for you, that causes distress. The Rebbe called it an awkward feeling. It's an English letter. The Rebbe used the word an awkward feeling. And the Rebbe said, and if someone's particularly sensitive, then even used the Hebrew term dikduke mitzvahs, even things that are not letter of the law type things, but they're beyond the letter of the law. If you're particularly sensitive, even lacking that could
Cause someone distressed.
make you feel weird. So I didn't say that because I didn't have the guts to tell people that. I thought it would turn people off. I thought that if I say that, people will say, well, you're being insensitive to my anxiety and you're using anxiety as a way to preach religion. So I didn't say it. Now, it's a 3-part series, and maybe I could argue that I made the right choice, that I'll tell them next week or the week after. But I didn't say it because I didn't want to lose my audience.
Right. You felt
And
like
I guess
it's almost too demanding.
it's too demanding. It is too
Right.
demanding.
It's not almost. It is too demanding.
It's too demanding.
Right. It's very
And
similar
then
to.
I have to ask myself, am I afraid to be too demanding because I don't want to lose my audience because I don't want to lose my audience? Or because education is
patient.
a process and I have to go step by step, and we're not there yet. I'm not ready to reveal that yet because
I think you've
the
answered the
audience
question
isn't
by
ready.
saying it now. I think you've answered the question by saying it now, but you're not worried about alienating my audience.
I'm not worried about alienating Ellie's audience. What other words are bad for the YouTube algorithm?
Right. So,
You know why I'm not worried about doing, but honestly, why I'm not worried about talking about it here? Because the other night when I was lecturing, that's frontal teaching. I'm standing at a podium, which is scary. I look how I look, which is also scary. And I really try to avoid anything that sounds top-down authoritative. But when we're talking, when you and I are talking, I feel like we can get away with a lot more.
this is true. This is true. Right. Anyone is welcome to tune in or tune out at any point in time where it's awkward for someone to walk out in front of a room. I understand. When you say scary looking, you mean as representing a rabbi?
Yeah. Yeah, that's scary for a lot of people.
Okay, so have we met our goal? Have we made it practical?
I would maybe give people homework.
Go ahead.
Think of a special tool or a skill set or ingenuity that you have. Think about ways perhaps you have used it in ways that degrade that God-given talent and how that made you feel. Did it make you feel bitter? Do you relate to that idea of they embittered their lives with work with mortar and brick? When you misappropriated your God-given talent to do something selfish, how did it feel?
It could be a God-given talent or a God-given resource.
Resources or talents, right. A talent would be a human resource. A resource would be something usually tangible, although a resource
someone
could
using
be a
money
network.
in a way to massage their ego as opposed to...
Hey, last time we spoke, we were speaking about money as energy, right? So, yeah, money is incredibly powerful. You can use money to make the world a better place, or you could use it to feed the Pharaoh.
Right. And a practical example for me, which is actually helpful, which I pointed out, was that the reminder that as I'm doing more of this, because it's only a couple months in, is to be mindful of the many ways that the voices can come in and the ego can start talking and say, hey, do it this way, do it that way, which you're saying is a selling out of sorts on the primary mission, which is which would be a tragedy. So that's
a literal tragedy, yeah.
Right. That's a personal reminder for me, and one that, like, that itself is enough. Like, that reminder is enough that this was valuable enough for me. Like I said, in search of more is a personal search of more. Like, this was an hour well spent just for that reminder.
And then but I'd follow that up and I'd say, and then the second part of the homework is now challenge yourself to think about something new and innovative and creative that you could do that you might even enjoy. You probably will enjoy it because there's nothing more satisfactory than using your talents. Creativity is the greatest pleasure. So think of something you can do new and innovative and bold that will make the world a more godly place.
Understood. I'm thinking if there would be some way I can bring this conversation back to a conversation you and I were having yesterday about this fundraiser you're working on, and kind of put it back on you a little bit. I benefited. I want
Okay, no problem.
Right. So you run SoulWords, an organization which's primary reason to exist.
We had to come up with a tagline, and we came up with it. If you want to know the one-liner, it's bringing spiritual wisdom to everyday language, I think is what we say.
Beautiful. But as someone who's watched this for an hour has seen how you've taken I learned this before, right, discussing this with you. So I read the pages, someone else may not have, and you gave me an appreciation and a finer understanding of this concept. Not that was only intellectually stimulating, which it was, and there was a pleasure there, but also that there was a very practical lesson that I can take for something, for a new journey that I'm embarking on, this one right here, and to be more mindful of not selling out. Beautiful.
I like how you said that.
What?
Be more mindful of not selling out.
Yeah. It's so easy to.
I love that. So, but hold on a second. That's gold. Basically, what was so bitter? Oh, I love this. What was so bitter about Chaim Levanim, about mortar and bricks? It was we were selling out. Take your beautiful talent, take your song, and now we're going to tell you how to sing, where to sing, what to sing. We're going to take your creativity and turn it into our commodity. You sell out. And it's nothing.
It's so easy to do. It's so easy to do because, I'll share from me. I did not look at, up until 2 months ago, 3 months ago, when I started putting more money and time and energy into this and saying, okay, I'm going to go all in on this, whatever that means. I'm going to use my talents and resources to expand and grow this podcast. I I wasn't even looking at views. I just recorded and it got posted, and I never looked how many people signed on, how many people went. And it was also in a hidden format. It was, you don't see a podcast, you can't tell how many views there weren't. Suddenly it goes to video, it goes to YouTube, it's on Instagram, and we're starting to use those channels, and those numbers become front and center. And we brought someone in, I'm getting a report every single week of how are we doing? How do we know how I'm doing? You know how you're doing from the numbers. So it becomes it's very easy to get trapped in that. And then, hey, these things are good for the numbers. These things are bad for the numbers. It's super easy to get lost in that as a measure of impact. But once I sell out, then there is no impact.
That's right.
So that having that as a reminder today and hopefully in the future is ridiculously important for me. So now to bring the favor, to share the love, I don't know if we could. I want to see. I'm exploring. Yesterday, you and I were having a conversation about the way your operation is run right now, where you use consultants and part-time people, and you get involved in a lot of the mundane and nitty-gritty aspects when you clearly have a talent and a skill, like we've just demonstrated here, to be able to make things practical and enjoyable. To take these spiritual ideas and make them both practical and enjoyable. I would say, like, that's your skill. But you also tinker with technology.
Okay. Yeah.
You also have to do some fundraising, not because
Yeah.
how good you are at it, but you're probably not very good at it. Like I most likely wouldn't hire you to set up.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Right.
My brother told me, he said that we spend 80% of the time, I think I may have told you this, we spend 80% of our time, 90% of the time on the things we're not good at because we're not good at it. The things we're good, we can do quickly. The things we're not good at, right. We end up spending so much time. So would this be an example of you have
That's so funny.
You have a God-given resource, a God-given talent and skill and everything else, where in a perfect world, for you to be able to have maximum effect, you would sit down and start talking. You'd either be reading books or speaking, basically. You'd be in one of those two modes all of the time.
Learning and teaching.
Exactly. Another way of saying it. You'd be in one or the other. Okay, sometimes you have to commute, so you have to. But if you can get someone else to drive for you, so in that mode, you can be learning or teaching.
A guy came up to me last night at Maidav. I daven Maidav at midnight very often. And it's an interesting setting. Anyways, I daven at the midnight Maidav at the Boston Beis Medrash in Lawrence, the latest Maidav around here. And some guy came up to me before Maidav because they didn't have a minyan yet. And he starts saying to me, "You should hire a private driver." And I was so annoyed. I was like, what are you talking about, private driver? Like, I got 1,000 things on my list that I need to do to get my life together before I hire a private driver. And now you just said to me, private driver.
Right. Would this be an example of it? I'm saying the ideal, right? The ideal would be where you're learning and teaching. Like, all of your energy is able to be devoted to learning and teaching. And there may be other talents and resources that were not talents that are outside of this also, and then responsibilities are outside of this. Parenting, that you're your children's only father. I'm not trying to encapsulate your whole life in this. I'm just saying this skill that the energy should be devoted to learning and teaching is you getting caught up in things that are not, such as some of the technology stuff, some of the fundraising, which some of the fundraising you have to do because it's the personal relationships you develop, but some of the stuff that stress you out about it. Are those things that are examples of misusing a talent or just not using it? Like, does it connect in any way to this conversation?
Yeah. And I want to deflect and say to you, it's not, I admit, Ellie, it's not good, but it's not exactly brick building because I'm not even using my skills. I'm doing something instead of using my skills. That's how I want to deflect. But then I reflect on it. Instead of deflect, I reflect. And I say, you know what? I'll be honest. I have I have a certain innovative mind. That's why people have to always remind myself, like, people want my time. They want to hear I was trying to walk down Kingston Avenue today. It took me a half an hour to go a block because everyone was coming over to me, asking me questions. And in my mind, it's like, well, what do you want from me? I'm not telling you anything so interesting, but apparently I have a way of thinking that people appreciate, right? So I'm not trying to be innovative. It's just, and by the way, I'm not saying I'm unique. I think everyone has a different way of thinking, and everyone brings something to the table. But the
sometimes
point
we
is,
take a talent to a specific skill, right? You could have taken your way of thinking and applied it to art, and you'd be in a corner drawing unique art that other people didn't think of.
Right.
But you took your unique skill and applied it, a lifetime of study of Hasidic philosophy. So 1 + 1 equals a lot.
So yeah, exactly. So what I'm saying is, it's not like the task is what defines. It's not the task that's definitive. It's the skills that are applied to the task. So the skills are, let's say, innovation, creativity. So it's not like I don't use my innovation, creativity when I'm wasting my time doing stuff I'm bad at. I'm being extremely creative and innovative, just ineffectively so, because I'm channeling that talent into something I'm not even good at.
Right. So there was something in the Sikha that struck me. It was a line which we didn't go over, but maybe it applies to this, is that we're always building. And
yes,
we're either building buildings of
and
holiness.
when I read that line, you know what I said to myself? If I'm not working on my recovery, I'm working on my relapse.
So maybe that's the line that connects to this point is, and maybe the deflection you tried before we have to refute, because you're saying you are using your innovation in these ways towards technology or towards other things, but maybe that's building the buildings of Pharaoh.
We're always building.
We're always
Question
building.
is
That was a
what?
line that struck me. Read it a couple of times. Is that we're always building. Like there's, in every single moment, a brick is being laid. Just the question
Right.
is,
Which project?
right? What is it towards?
Is it the Holy Temple or is it Pharaoh's cities?
So assuming, and obviously this is with the best of intentions, is to build SoulWords. So if there's a little bit discomfort in the process, it's okay. Hopefully, permission to proceed, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So assuming that there's a fear behind it, for whatever reason, a fear, I don't want to be seen with the driver. What are people going to think of me if they think I'm giving money for this guy to have a driver? Right? This is what. Right?
Oh, definitely, for sure.
Or there's a fear of taking on a salary of someone who would take, a certain amount of these things and saying,
right. And then I'm not even going to give him stuff to do because I don't trust him. Then I'm going to have to pay him anyway.
So if these are all fears, and fear and ego are synonymous as well.
Yes.
So it sounds like there's practical applications for me and practical applications for you in this sikha. So hopefully so would that be an ideal goal for those who are, I would imagine that there's a number of people who listen to me and listen to us, and they're supporters of SoulWords as a result of the work we've done together. Whether large supporters or emotional supporters,
Well, I'll tell you something cute that happened.
Yeah.
Last time we spoke, you talked about putting a 0 in front of or
adding a 0 to donation. Yes, if you're used to giving 18, give 180.
Right.
A few times.
So there was a guy who actually is a listener. How do I know he's a listener? Because he comments sometimes on the projects that we do. And he usually gives 180. And last week I saw he did a credit card donation on SoulWords
of 1,800
for 1,800. Yeah.
Okay. As soon as he gets comfortable, let me know and we'll go again. We'll send it. We'll send it again.
Yeah.
So, what's the Jewish thing? If you do it 3 times, there's chazaka, then it's comfortable. So once you get 3 1,800s, you let me know. We'll send him a replay to get it to 18,000. Right. So that's something very practical. Right. So meaning I'm not saying this just to make it practical, but also to assist in that. I want to support you. And if there are people listening towards that, is that a goal for you? Is that an ideal goal to say that you're in a place, obviously no one can get to 100%, but you're in a place where as much of your work is devoted to learning and teaching, and that those who are supporting you to be able to free up some of these things that some may be perceived to be luxuries. I have a driver, or some maybe another employee that's an added cost, or whatever the specific fears that get in the way of each one. But the goal for you is to get to that place. And from us, myself and the others who are in a position to help, to support those efforts to get you to that place. Is that something you want? Is that a good goal?
I not only think it is a good goal, the way that you're framing it is that it's the right thing to do.
It's building the good kind of buildings. It's using our bricklaying for positive purposes.
I'm not going to stop being creative. Like you said, we're always building something. And if I'm putting my creativity into learning and teaching, that's where it's going. But if I'm putting my creativity into, this is very shameful, but like something I spent 20 minutes on yesterday was this is very shameful, but figuring out how much my Ubers in Cleveland are going to cost on Sunday. So that at least I do have a guy who handles my speaking engagements, but he had to invoice how much my travel costs are. So I spent 20 minutes figuring out how much my Ubers in Cleveland are going to cost so he could invoice them.
It couldn't just be a round number and I charge $100 for Ubers a day.
I don't know. I'm creative,
Right. Why do it the easy way if you can...
Such insanity.
Right. Okay, good. I'm glad that we're both able to be... to make it practical for us in a way that hopefully others can watch and make practical for themselves. Because it's so easy to sit in the podium and say, you guys make it practical. Take this lesson for you in your life. We have it figured out.
Right.
No, this is something. So we beat the goal because not only did I get something practical, but you got something practical. And because we did it in this format, you have something to remind me of. I have something to remind you of, support you. And hopefully we have a number of people supporting and reminding us of saying, hey, Eli, I watched that podcast.
All these people out there to hold us accountable.
Yeah, well, some hold us accountable, but a different way of holding us accountable, we say supporting us, right? Certainly in terms of what you're doing and your
efforts. If you have a conscience, something that's public knowledge becomes accountability. Because no one has to call me and pressure me and say to me, did you do that thing Eli told you to do? It's just the reality. I know that people know about it.
Right. There was nothing I told you to do. It's just, something in terms of that we both agreed is a good thing.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What I'm saying is that it's not just holding accountable, it's actually supporting, meaning that people can help towards those efforts.
Right. Yeah. 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 But that's giving them work. I want to own the work that I have to do. Meaning to say, even if nobody wants to pay for this, it's still the right thing for me to do.
Right. Good. And right, you want to own the work that you have to do, and I want to support the work that you have to do, and I'm sure vice versa. I want to own the work that I have to do, and others want to support that as well. So help us beat the algorithm without me having to sell out. All right, Rabbi Shais, this was beautiful. It was a very good practical lesson for me. And if you change your mind about the last 20 minutes of this, just let me know and we'll... No way. Let's put it out there. Let's put it out there. No, put it out quickly before I change my mind. Right. But payback, my friend said, karma is a bleep. Yeah, I'm saying, the karma is a bee,
right.
The term. He says, only if you are. Right? The person is and karma is. So that's what he says. Yeah, but meaning the point is that last week you helped me grow by making me somewhat uncomfortable, and I learned a lot about about myself from that conversation around money. that you encouraged me to do, and it was somewhat uncomfortable. And hopefully I return the favor. Karma is a bonus.
I really appreciate it. And thank you for checking midway whether I was getting uncomfortable. That was very sensitive of you. And it made me feel safe to do this. So thank you.
Appreciate it. We all have different talents and skills, and we must use it to bring it to the public, and hopefully it shines a brighter light. It builds. What's the goal? To build towards good. To bricks of buildings, bricks of a house for God in this world.
House for God. That's right.
In
That's
this world.
right.
Amen. And I hope that this was part of that, because we were just laying bricks for the last hour and a half. I hope there were bricks in the house of God.
Laying bricks like in basketball is a bad thing.
True. But if we understand the deeper symbol, right? The deeper intent, according to Hasidic philosophy, based on the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, we understand that laying bricks is not a bad thing. It's the best thing.
Yeah.
And the only thing.
It's the only thing. We're always laying bricks. The question is, in whose house?
Right. In whose house? Beautiful.
Whose house are we building?
In God's house or Pharaoh's house?
I think Bob Dylan said that. He said, you may serve the devil, you may serve the Lord, but you got to serve somebody.
Serve somebody. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi Shais. Always a pleasure.
Rabbi, it's been a pleasure. All right.
Talk soon.